I was married to my college sweetheart right out of college. I became a lawyer in 1976, which is 3 years later than I should have started. So I'm dating myself. And after 20 years of marriage to my sweetheart, it looked like we were headed for divorce. But there was no place to go that does what compassionate mediation does, because compassionate mediation is a process where you teach people how to communicate from their highest and best self, let go of their limiting beliefs and judgments, unburden pain from the past, and relate from their heart. Now, that sounds weird or woo-woo to us left-brain lawyers that I was for several years, until I realized that I was headed for divorce. So when I realized I was headed for divorce in 1990, I became a mediator. But mediating your own divorce, I realize, is like delivering your own baby. Maybe it's possible, but you don't want to do it, especially if you're codependent. Because as I was trying to negotiate with my husband, I was trying to please him instead of just talk about what was true for me. And then in 1994, I met Dick Schwartz, who was the head of internal family systems therapy, and I became a licensed clinical professional counselor. So I'm a therapist, a mediator, and an attorney, and I'm a Chopra Certified Teacher of Meditation, Yoga, and Ayurveda. So when I say compassionate mediation blends emotional and spiritual healing along with legal and financial information or support, that's what I want to share with you. So when I started many, many years ago, maybe 35 years ago, I had an office. My office had a waiting room, and I would see individuals who were going through conflict, and what I taught them they could take back to their relationship. I'd see couples who were coming to me for counseling. Sometimes one of them had one foot out the door and the other one wanted to stay. And then I had people that came strictly for divorce mediation. So because I had a waiting room, I could interview each of them individually. And then I put them back together and I gave them my introduction, which I'll share with you. And I had an easel in my room. It kept us all on the same page. And as we talked about things, as I put up information, they could follow along. And when we agreed or even didn't agree, but had a range of ideas, they went on the easel too. And that kept us up to date. Now I'm totally on Zoom. So everything that I'm doing works on Zoom, works with couples. And I've worked with couples and usually without their lawyers, but when their lawyers are needed, their lawyers have either come to my office or they've come into the session on Zoom. It's not that I get to be the judge, but I get to monitor how everybody's communicating so that what I'm calling their higher self is what we're going to be talking from. So I'm going to call compassionate mediation a toolkit for healing. I think families need to be broken, but can be peacefully and respectfully restructured. And Albert Einstein once said, men marry women hoping they will never change. Women marry men hoping to change them. And inevitably, they are both disappointed. And that is how we get our clients, because they're both disappointed. And many times people stay in a relationship when they should leave. Many times people leave when they could stay. And the reason they do is because they don't know how to communicate. But compassionate mediation helps you communicate about everything. And when someone is upset, I realize that inside there's this inner child, there is this part of them yearning for connection. And Thich Nhat Hanh has said that when there is conflict, if you go to one side and talk about the pain and suffering of the other side, and then go to the first side and talk about the pain and suffering of the other side, that's the way to peace. And most people want to take sides, but what we do in mediation is we don't take sides. We hold space for the realities and the feelings and the heart and the needs and the fears of both parties to be considered as we help them navigate all the information. And as one of my clients said, we guide them mindfully through the impact of divorce so that it doesn't have to destroy their family, their finances, their future. And what we do that is because compassionate mediation is useful for individuals as well as couples. So if you get this experience, you could coach people that are going through divorce too with your expertise, because we do talk about all the different issues and your clients gain insights and skills to sometimes restructure their current relationship. So not all mediations in this situation have to end in divorce, but it could end in a better new relationship, a peaceful separation, a healthy post-nup. There's a lot of things to restructure or separate under the best possible conditions for all concerned. So what is your role in compassionate mediation? Number one is you're going to facilitate with these skills and the skills you already have, a peaceful restructuring of the family. And even if a couple comes to me for counseling, I always tell them their first marriage is over. It's not about fixing or saving it. It's about creating something new. But with compassionate mediation, you also talk about all the issues they're going to have to talk about should they decide to separate or divorce or move on to a post-nup or some other way of living together. So your role is to inform, guide, and set a tone of respect. So you come in from your higher self to model how to be with the parts of each of them that are scared and sad and hurt and angry and frustrated and guilty and all those feelings that they have. And you foster self-led conversations, which I'm going to talk about in how I do my first interview. And you encourage responsive decisions instead of reactive decisions, because we all know about the old fight, flight, freeze way of reacting when people are nervous. I recently learned about fawn, which was my personal favorite as a codependent. How can I act nice enough that they'll like me enough that I don't have to get into conflict? We can change the face of divorce one heart at a time. And that is my goal. Because as Wayne Dyer says, when we change the way we look at something, what we look at changes. So if we're looking at it from our higher self, instead of our reactive parts, we have more compassion for the other side. I remember in my mediation training many years ago, it was Mr. Brown's and Mr. Jones, and they both wanted the orange crop until they talked and talked and talked and fought and fought and fought. But Mr. Jones wanted the juice and Mr. Brown wanted the rind. And when they talked about it, they could come to a middle ground. So a lot of times you'll find in mediation, people are talking about money or maintenance, and the wife might be looking for just income that's going to come certainly, and the husband's looking for something else. But when you have a higher level of perspective, you can take everybody's needs into consideration and come up with a way to mediate the middle. So what we're going to talk about today is the way I do my first interview, how to help people practice compassionately communicate even when there's conflict, how to talk about all the options that are open for them, help them understand their legal and financial rights and responsibilities, and create a new relationship, which they're going to have to do. As co-parents, whether they're separated, if they're divorced, they're going to have to create a new relationship. And with your help, the relationship they create after working with you can be better than the one that they left. For sure, it will be better than the one that they left. But I've been doing this for 35 years, and I know it works. And not only does it work, I have codified everything that I have done in my book, Compassionate Mediation. There's a first chapter at lindacrollbook.com. We a lot of this. But what my goal is, when I was getting divorced from my beloved 20-year married husband, and I was sitting in the courtroom with us, even though I was an attorney at the time, we were in the front of the courtroom, our attorneys were in the back, and I told myself there had to be a better way. There had to be a better way for two people who once loved each other to end their union and create something new. So with blending law, mediation, higher consciousness, internal family systems therapy, that's how compassionate mediation was born. And because when I would have new people come in, I would do the same initial interview every time. I would do the questions I ask. I would do the introduction of my process. I would also do a guided meditation that I'll tell you about. And in 45 minutes, I have them walk out with more hope. Hope that, number one, I can help them, but hope that they can look at their relationship, that they've both done the best they knew how to do, but they can learn a new way to communicate, and I can help them do that, and we can talk about everything. So those are some of the skills that I want to offer you today. But first, I'd like you to have the experience of what it would be like to come in as my client. So let's say I'm on Zoom and the wife has called me to make an appointment and they both show up. I always make it a point that I talk first, I interview first the person who did not call me, so they don't feel I'm aligning with the person that called me first. But I'll say, hello, I'll say, I'm Linda, do you have any questions about me? How did you come to me? And then I'll ask them a few questions about how long they've been married, if they have any children, just some generic questions to see if they have any questions about me or questions in front of each other. And then I separate them. And that's where the magic comes in, because when I take them alone, I do about a 10 or 15 minute interview with each one. And I'm going to give you kind of a general overview. And then when I go back to the slides, you'll see that they're in the slides, so you don't have to take notes. It's all kind of ready for you. But let's say you're my client. You came in and you can think about this now. If you want to think about somebody with whom you're having conflict, okay, so think about someone with whom you're having conflict. And I'll ask you these questions. I'll say, what's going on? What do they do that bothers you? What do you do in response? What do you think about what they're doing? How do you feel about it? And with those few questions, I'm listening for the parts that they are triggered in their relationship. Are they withholding? Are they judgmental? Are they angry? Are they sad? Are they guilty? So I'm listening for them to describe their behaviors, their thoughts, their feelings. And then I'll ask them my magic wand question. If you had a magic wand, what would you like to see happen? And when you're working with couples, you don't always know because they don't always know. One day they want to stay together, they're getting divorced just because the other one didn't care enough to stop them. But in the magic wand question, when I have them alone, they can tell me, I wish he would change. I wish he would just get over the affair and come back to me and we could work it out. That tells me her GPS, she really doesn't want a divorce. She's really here because she has to be. And then I'll ask her to tell, and this might be a little out there for some of you who aren't also therapists, but I'm telling you, if you put some of these questions in place, it really helps with the existential empathy that you're going to need when they get triggered, because they will be triggered with every new experience. When you talk about the house or maintenance or assets, all their parts get triggered, and you can watch them do what they do at home, or you can teach them a new way to communicate. So I will very briefly ask them about their family of origin, meaning I take a little notepad and I'm writing down dad, mom. I'm listening for any secrets that they may share with me. They may not, but I might ask, was there any drinking? Not really. Dad had a couple cocktails a night. Okay, I'm listening to the fact they may have an alcoholic parent, which tells me they maybe have grown up codependent, which tells me they're not going to be able to advocate so well for themselves. When I ask where they are in the sibling hierarchy, I was the first of 5. So they're the responsible kid. They've done it all. They don't know how to ask for help. So I'm listening very briefly, because this is all in under 15 minutes. And then I say, tell me about what your spouse would tell me about you. What do you do that bothers him or her? And how does he act? And how does he feel? And what does he do? And then they'll tell me he thinks I'm nagging all the time, but it's really because he's drinking. Whatever they tell me, I'm listening again for their parts. And then I'll say, could you tell me about the other party's family of origin? And that's a great question, because when they realize that their spouse came possibly from an alcoholic home, or possibly they were the baby and the mother was gone all the time, and they don't have the skills to communicate the way you'd like them to communicate, that already shifts the focus to a little more compassion for the other party, because no wonder they can't relate the way you'd like them to. They were never taught how to do that. So again, most clients want to tell you their story. They want you, and even if you're a lawyer, they want you to be their therapist. They call you at all hours to vent on what their partner's doing. So I usually talk to therapists and coaches who need to learn the legal part. Now, as I'm talking to mediators and attorneys, I want to help you with the emotional piece as well as the legal part. Because if you don't do both, they fight it out with you as their weapon sometime if you are their lawyer, And if you're their mediator, they fight it out in front of you because they just do what they kept doing, but in front of you. So you have to referee as opposed to teach them something different. So they want to start having their stories told, but I tell them, you know, if you just tell me the story you'd like to tell me, you'll walk out of here feeling marginally better, but it won't be any change because you'll be listened to, but I won't help you look at a different perspective. So as I'm asking the questions, I'm gently leading them back to the questions so I can get an overview, and I'm going to describe to you what I do with that. So then after about 10 or 15 minutes with one party, I thank them very much for all that they shared. I tell them I want to hear about everything they started to share with me, and we'll have time to do that. Then I put them in their own room and I go back to the other party and I say, how do you feel about being here? Which is often a good way to start because a lot of people are nervous about being there or sad about being there or relieved about being there. And as you understand where they're coming from, that's where you can empathize more and show them you're here to listen to them. And basically, I do with the second party exactly what I did with the first. What do you do? What does she do? What's your magic wand? What's your family of origin? What's the other party's family of origin? The magic wand question tells me which direction are they going. Are they both going in the same direction? Because one might be one that wants to get divorced for sure, and the other one is only along for the ride because they don't see any option. So I tell the initiator, you have to be able to talk about some of the feelings. I tell the person that's a little ambivalent or wants to stay, you have to be able to talk about a divorce. Otherwise, your partner is not going to stay because they're not totally committed to marriage counseling. And if it feels like marriage counseling, they're gone. So we make a space where we talk about everything, where the person who wants the divorce talks about the feelings led up to it when it's relevant. We don't make it all about them, otherwise the feelings, otherwise they would leave. And at the same time, I'm weaving in all the information that we have to share with them about a divorce. And sometimes I'll do that in the first session because two people come for divorce. They don't want all this woo-woo stuff. They don't want to do a guided meditation. They just want the facts. What are the facts? So I'm going to give you a combination of all the above. When I'm doing the interview for each of them, the magic wand question, the family of origin question, I also ask them their word for spiritual. And again, this may be too woo for some of you. It's okay. You don't have to. But the reason I'm asking is because my goal is to help people come from what I'm calling their higher self. And when they talk about, it's not about God, it's not about religion, they may not believe in either. They might be the universe or energy. And if they say God, I'll say something like, well, where is God? Everywhere. Inside of you? Yes. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about self. And if they don't use God, we use true self, nature, energy. How do you feel in nature? Calm. So now that I've had both of them interviewed for 10 or 15 minutes, okay, I put them together and I thank them both for sharing with me what they shared with me and to let them know I can help them. But then I ask, is it okay if I share with you my blurb? I actually call it a blurb. I tell them it takes 2.5 minutes and I'm going to give you my blurb. Here's what I say to them. I believe we all have a healthy self, capital S self. And when we're in self, we're calm, clear, and compassionate. You know those moments? They're just moments because we're not always in self. We're in parts that we exile, parts that we manage with, and parts that we get extreme with. So the exiles are the parts that we learned in childhood weren't going to get our needs met. So if we felt sad or hurt or scared, we pushed it aside because we didn't want to deal with it. And we learned how to manage. We went out in the world and we were smart, pleasing, caretaking, loving. We managed in a lot of different ways, but a lot of us put on what I call a self, where you look like you're in self, but you're really feeling a lot of those exiled feelings. You're sad, you're hurt, you're scared. So when you can't manage those exiled feelings, out come extreme behavior. So you might eat too much, drink too much, gamble too much, get depressed, get enraged, have an affair. There's a lot of ways you could numb, but none of these are self. So my job is to help you get to self. And they are confused, but then I go back and I talk about what they told me. So Mary your father was working a lot, so you were taking care of everybody. So you grew up and you needed to be responsible, right? So when John is not helping you, you're feeling very unloved, right? So what you do is you get angry and John hears you nagging and John starts watching more TV and then you feel more abandoned. And is this kind of what goes on for you guys? Yes, because I'm using their words. And then I will say, well, notice what's happening in your body. And usually what's happening is their bodies are tense because I've just named their parts. So I asked them, I'm not going to do it now. I'll show you how you can get it. I asked them if it's okay if I do a 5-minute meditation, because I want them to have a sense of self. Now, I have had left brain, very highly motivated, very wealthy people come in my office who do not expect this at all. They expect me to go to the board, give them the facts, and that's it. And I tell them I'm going to do that. That's why in the first session, I'll often segue to the assets and the debts and everything, so they at least know I have that expertise. But I tell them if I don't help them communicate better, as soon as they're triggered, they're going to resort to old patterns. So I get permission and I do a meditation. And the meditation is very brief. I have them breathe, take a couple belly breaths, root down to the center of the earth, invite nurturing energy up, bring it down from the sky, surround themselves with compassionate energy, and notice their parts. Notice where they're feeling tension, tightness, thoughts, feelings. And then I invite them to walk into nature, to a mountain, separate from their parts, and go up in self as high up the mountain as they want. And then I ask them to take a moment and notice their partner at the top of his or her mountain without all of their parts attached. And as much as they can, send compassion in their direction. Then I wait a moment. I tell them it's time to come back down the mountain to collect their parts, even if there's a part of you that doesn't want to, because you're going to realize that once you give your own parts the attention they need to unburden the pain from the past, they carry their own wisdom and light. So ever so gently, come back down the mountain, back down the path, back through the doorway, and back to your room. So I don't know how long it took me to do that, but that is basically my first session. And with that compassion comes a sense of, oh, I don't have to make all the decisions now. I don't have to wait till I'm divorced to begin my life again. I can start now to have a better relationship, even as we talk about assets, debts, co-parenting, selling the house. And Linda can help us do that. And that's what I'd like to help you learn, is how to do that. Well, that's why I coined the phrase and trademarked the phrase compassionate mediation many years ago. My dream was that someday it would be the next collaborative divorce or conscious uncoupling, and that there would be people all over the world who learn this process. So whenever there was a conflict, an individual could find someone that knew compassionate mediation who could lead them through this program process and take it back to their relationship, or they would come and whenever there was a conflict, talk about it, because it gives them the opportunity. Because in the second session, I talk about empathy and teach them how to be empathetic with each other. And as we're talking about the house and parenting and everything, so it's a mix, it's a blend of emotional healing, spiritual growth, legal and financial information. Because I'm a therapist, sometimes I have allowed people to, just use me as a therapist, and I book them for insurance rates. Other times it's strict mediation and it's by the hour. So I think mediation can be a healing experience if we bring in this awareness that we're all doing the best we can, that we all have a healthy self from which we communicate, and that we're all triggered and have some very bad habits that we picked up from our family of origin, we picked up in prior relationships, we've been doing over and over in the same relationship. And it doesn't have to be that way. This is called internal family systems, where Dick Schwartz, who's the originator of it, talks about the fact that we all have a healthy self. And when we're, quote, in self, we're calm, clear, compassionate, courageous, confident, curious, connected, a few other C words, and I add grateful. When I'm doing the interview, I'm not talking parts. I'm listening. What's their behavior? What do they do? Okay. Do they act out? Do they get sarcastic? Do they withhold sex? They don't always tell me all of that, but they tell me a lot in the first session. And so I'm listening for the parts. And when I do my blurb, I'm identifying their parts because I'm using, John, you manage by being very hardworking. And then when you feel that you're being unappreciated by Mary, you just turn on the TV and you zone out for hours, right? And so I'm identifying what parts are they exiling by pushing aside their sadness, their hurt, their fear. What are they managing with? What do they show the world and each other? And how do they get extreme? And then how do those parts interact? So I'm listening from that perspective. This works with everything. This works with parent-child. This works with schoolyards. This works with work relationships at work, because it's the same thing. You're appealing to the humanistic, existential humanness of each of them, and telling them that, yes, they're being triggered, but they can relate in a much more conscious way, mindful way, compassionate way. And so this works with every situation you have, because the first one is to find out how they're reacting and acting, and give them a felt sense. And if you don't want to do the meditation, you don't have to, but you got even the kind of minute overview that I gave you, that there's a way to energetically shift your energy. There's a way to acknowledge that you are aware that you have some tightness, tension, thoughts, feelings. And then I say to show that compassion to your parts and let these parts notice you coming from your calm, compassionate self. So in the first minute of the meditation, they shift into an awareness that they are more than the sum of their parts, and so is their partner. And the communication we're going to do after we come back from the mountain, I said, and that's how we're going to do the mediation. And if you get triggered and I have to separate you to help you, catch up emotionally with what you're feeling so that you can listen to the facts, we'll do that. That's the first session within 45 minutes. As I said, there's a specific set of questions. I introduce self in parts. I ask about the family of origin. I do the guided meditation. And we talk them off the ledge of thinking they have to make a decision now, or thinking that the only way they're going to be happy again is when they've made the divorce final. And until then, they're just going to be hanging on by gritting their teeth. So we give them a chance to breathe. And here are some of the questions. What does your partner do? What do you do to trigger your partner? Describe your family of origin. What's your word for spiritual? If you had a magic wand, what would you want? What's your GPS? Am I taking you both in the direction of a divorce, straight on? Just go to the assets and the board and give them all the legal stuff? Or do I need to mediate the fact that one is heartbroken and not ready to go at all, and the other one's already having an affair and out the door? Different set of facts. Because when you get a client who's in self, these are the C words of self. They can make calm and clear decisions. They can have compassionate for themselves and their partner, not with being codependent, but to understand that a Pyrrhic victory is not a victory. So for one of them to win and the other one to lose, and the children be in the middle of the shrapnel of their animosity, that is not a good outcome. So we want compassion to kind of rule over what we're doing so that they can, again, coming from self, be confident in asking for what they want and need, connected to you, to the process, so they don't zone out, they're not overwhelmed, courageous if there's a challenge or adversity, they're going to hang in there, and co-create reasonable compromises from self. Because instead of being dogmatic or insistent, or rigid, they're going to be curious. So those are the C words of self. And I always add grateful. And when you do that, they can practice compassionate communication. I don't have time to offer it now, but I have a handout that I give them in the second session on empathy, how to talk about the feelings, how to talk about what they're sad about, and have the other person listen, understand, and make an amend. And then the first person will say, thank you. And then we work out a compromise, because you'll notice that when you start talking about the house and the children, and one of them is really just melting down, we have to take a breath and make sure the other party knows how much the first one is suffering, so they can soften how they're responding for the mutual good of all concerned. So when we're talking about empathy, we're talking about the pain and the sadness and the fear. We're not talking about a judgment of the other party. You always neglect me. You never do whatever. But when you don't pay attention to me, I feel sad. So the other party can say, okay, when I watch TV, I hear that you feel sad. Is that right? Yes. And then reading down the sheet, I understand that when I spend too much time on TV, you feel sad. Now, these are moot. Maybe you're further down the road of divorce. So when I yell at you, because they're probably still doing that, you feel sad. And I have them put in understanding, not just, okay, I heard you, I'm sorry, but actually say the words, I understand that when I yell, you feel hurt. And then I'm sorry, I don't want to yell. I want to learn a new way to communicate. And I'm sorry. Again, it's all on the sheet. And then the first party says, thank you. I would like to ask that we can do this without yelling. And already there's a shift because they both understood. And then I go back to the other one who says, when you nag at me, I feel like you're a nag. And I will suggest to John, let's say John said that, well, that's your thought, John, it's not your feeling. So how do you feel if you're nagged by your wife? I feel mad. I know, but what's under the mad? So I get them to talk about, I feel sad that I work all day and she still wants me to take out the garbage. So talk about your sadness. So when you nag at me, I feel sad. And Mary can say, but you don't do anything I want you to, but she is taught to say, I hear you say that when I nag, you feel sad. Is that right? Yes, I understand that when I nag, you feel sad, period. And I'm sorry. I don't want to nag. I want to learn a new way to communicate. And I'm sorry. And then John will say, thank you. I'd like to think we can get through this divorce without you nagging at me about everything. And then they move on. So, first interview, create a compassionate relationship with empathy. Explore all options. I've already mentioned what I told the initiator and non-initiator. The initiator has to be able to talk a little bit about feelings. The non-initiator has to be able to talk about the law and the finances for both of them to stay in. So I asked both of them, and when we're exploring options, here's what you're exploring, because there's lots of ways you can help them. You can look at the current situation and see if helping them resolve some of their issues would make a difference. You can see if a postnup would solve the relationship, because maybe they just can't figure out what to do about the future, but you can help craft a postnuptial agreement that would need to be finalized with the lawyers. What if they just separated? Can't you negotiate a separation where they just cool down for a little bit, or talk about a legal separation, the pros and the cons, or divorce? Or you bring in a budget form when you start talking about the money, and we're going to talk about all the rest of those and how I do it. Because when you talk about understanding rights and finances, and you ask me how I do this now, is I start a Google Doc. I share my screen with them. And then as I am talking, I am taking notes onto the Google Doc to make sure that my clients are fully informed and fully understand, so that the fear is alleviated. Because many times when someone goes to a lawyer or a mediator and they don't really know what's going on, they're just overwhelmed and they're kind of like a deer in the headlights. But I want to make sure that sometimes starting in the first session, certainly by the second, we have gone over this. I'm going to take a breath because I made a lot of slides that you may already know as mediators or attorneys. But I want to show you how I talk to my clients about them so that you get how I've incorporated everything in here. Okay, so again, if they both are ready for a divorce and they don't want more into this woo-woo communication stuff, they just want to know what I know, I'll go to the easel, I'll open the Google Docs, and we'll start talking. And here's what I do. I talk about the fact that there's 3 things to talk about: a property settlement, maintenance, and the children. And I give them this information. I don't have it all written down for them, but I do talk pretty quickly and talk about the fact that Illinois is not a community property state like California. We go by equitable distribution. I'm typing, meanwhile, on my paper while I'm saying this. But what's equitable to one may not be equitable to the other. So there's a set of relevant criteria that they look at, like the age of each person, the future earning capacity, who's going to stay home with the children. There's 11 different criteria. You divide assets, you allocate debts, and you figure out what's marital and non-marital. Okay, 30 seconds. We just talked about property. Okay, then I might go into equitable distribution a little bit. I may not. Basically, I'll say it can be divided 50-50, maybe 60-40, 70-30 based on relevant criteria. You just heard me do that in 30 seconds. And it's without regard to marital misconduct. So your assets will be divided using some of these future earning ability. If you have non-marital assets, amount and sources of income, health, age, etc. And then if they came in, and even in the first session, if they're ready, I go to my easel or I go to my Google Doc and I say, let's talk about your income. Now, when you want to see all parts get triggered, start talking about money, and you'll see a backlog of resentment and fear and feeling isolated and feeling overwhelmed and feeling like it's too much of his job or not enough of her job. So you're already working with a lot of emotions, and you want to make sure that it stays as neutral as possible by just putting up the numbers. So basically, what's an overview? And I tell them it's for conversation. What do you each earn? Bonuses are included, any other income, and what are the other assets? So I go to the board and I put down the assets, your appropriate, net value, any funds, stocks, non-marital assets. And I'm just taking notes. I'm just saying, this is just for us all to be on the same page. And for debts, I ask what the mortgage, line of credit, credit cards, loans, etc. Again, just getting more and more information. And then when we start talking about dividing assets and going to the house, and again, this is too much for the first session oftentimes, because unless they've done a lot of prep work at home, by now you've lost one of them. They're either overwhelmed, they're overloaded, but let's say you do get to this in the second session or the third session or further down the line. And if you get an expertise in compassionate mediation, you can do all of this under the umbrella of compassionate mediation. You have to take Dick and Case's training to be a mediator per se, but compassionate mediation gives you the tools to do both. Back to the house. So when you start talking about the house, you'll see all the emotions come up, because I often say it's the first thing you do is you let go of the relation. You might let go of your partner, then you have to let go of the relationship. But when you have to let go of the dream, that's when all the emotions come out. And letting go of the house is the dream. So when we're talking about what their options are, they could separate for a while. And often having people separate for a while gives them a perspective to talk about, what do you do with the money while you're separated? Are you going to date? What are you going to tell other people? But it gives them a time out to decide if they really want to divorce or not, but they're using you for that help. And you can tell them they can nest, meaning the children stay, they come and go, they can sell it and split the proceeds, sell it later, but don't keep the house for the children. So again, I'm kind of throwing all of it at you. When we talk about maintenance, it's either need or ability to pay. We have statutes. It's the amount and length of time, whether it's but again, I don't give them all at once, but when I do, it's a very short version of this, knowing that if it's a statute, we're going to have to put in a formula. If it's not, we have to talk about it, but we'll come back. And then parenting and child support. And I always tell them in a mediator, we go with joint legal, joint physical. We have to have ongoing cooperation. I tell them when I draw up a document, I hope the document goes into a drawer and they never have to look at it again. That they became such good co-parents, respectful, that they just can have each other's backs the whole time. We can talk about life insurance, taxes, et cetera, but that's further down the line. Okay, that's it for those slides. So when people come to me, whether it's for individual couples counseling or divorce mediation, they come out with some kind of peace. And that's what I'd like them to say about you, because the benefit to you is that you will differentiate yourself. You are more than just a mediator, more than just a lawyer, more than a therapist. You have an expertise where people will know that if they come see you, they're going to come out better than when they came in. That you'll have more satisfaction and referrals. You won't burn out because you don't have to referee. I used to feel like I was a liver sometimes. I'd take his anger and translate it for her. But now you just have to bring your higher self energy and create a space where they can lean into theirs. So you don't get as burned out and you feel inspired and uplifted to know that you're actually almost doing, I don't want to call it a ministry, but you know what I mean. You are bringing awareness to a very difficult situation and healing couples and families. The attorneys are part of a team. So no decisions will be made without their attorneys. We will talk about everything. You will be fully informed. You will take all the information back to your attorney, and you will bring your attorney's information back here. I said, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what his attorney is going to say, and I'm going to tell you what her attorney is going to say. And sometimes you're going to be upset with me because it'll sound like I'm siding with one or the other, but I don't want to make just a mediated settlement in a vacuum. I want to make sure that we've talked about everything. So your lawyer's input is very important. And I often drew up the document, or I made a memorandum of understanding. But either way, I'm sending out to both sides, what are we talking about? And I say, if there's ever an impasse, your attorneys are welcome. It's different from collaborative divorce, because collaborative, both attorneys decide that if it goes to trial, they pull out. So you don't need a collaborative attorney. You just need an attorney that's open to working with someone who's going to mediate. And in compassionate mediation, we talk about all of the above: emotional, spiritual, physical, legal, financial. It's all in there. Dick Schwartz, who's the head of IFS, says that divorce brings out the worst in us and leaves lasting scars. But we can lift divorcing couples out of their narrow perspectives and then learn the larger lessons from their relationship and proceed based on the interest of all involved, that it's relationship healing at its best. So you can get a chapter of the book at Linda Kroll Book. I wrote Compassionate Divorce. It's free on Kindle. It's that there can be a different way to get divorced. You can get a roadmap, lindakroll.com roadmap, which kind of looks like this. It's hard to see on here: how to be your best self, compassionately, communicate confidently, explore your options, understand finances, and create a new relationship. That's in the roadmap. And I'd love to have you join me for a chat, because if you go get the roadmap, there's a way to sign up for a 15-minute chat. And if you're interested at all in the certification, receive the support you need from me with sessions, videos, handouts, templates, scripts, manuals, practice, and you'll get mentored and supported in an inspiring collaborative community. But I would love your feedback. I would love your questions. And I really thank you for hanging in here for a very fast-paced, but hopefully helpful talk.